Hello everyone. In this session, we will talk about navigation streamlined Docker container deployment on AWS. Before that, let me introduce myself. Myself, Avinash Shashikant Ravi. I am currently working at Eagleview as a senior software engineer. I am an AWS community builder and active community member. Along with this, I am a supporting co-organizer for Docker Bangalore. I write a blog at internetcutter.com. This is about myself. Let's understand what we'll cover in this session. In this session, what we will cover: understanding Docker container, AWS ECS, that is the Elastic Container Services, benefits of Docker container deployment on AWS, deploying Docker container on ECS, and what are the challenges are there. So let's understand first Docker container. So when you look at this picture, which is the instant noodle package, right? So what comes in your mind first? Like, you can make instant noodles by just opening this package and following the instruction without making such effort in terms of test and time. Like, you open the packet, you mix up the masala and put it into the hot water vessel and boil it for a few time. After that, everything will be ready to cook, right? Like, on a similar note, Docker container is also an instant noodle package where you don't need to do anything. Like, Docker help you to separate out your application from infra so that you can deliver the final product faster. This is exactly similar to making a 2 minutes of instant noodle. Disclaimer, even if say 2 minutes, it takes some time. Similar, like Docker container deployment takes some time. While cooking instant noodle, we have to open the package and put in the hot water. As I said, right? Exactly similar. And Docker container are to configure the infra and run the application irrespective of which OS you are using. Like, if you're using the Windows OS, using a Linux OS, Fedora, CentOS, anything, right? Is independent of that particular. You just have to create package and deploy it, whichever the choice OS you have, and deploy it. That's how exactly it works. So this is called a Docker container. And this logo or this image is very familiar. And nowadays it's become a user-friendly developer tool. Let's understand what is the ECS, that is the AWS Elastic Container Service. Okay, AWS Elastic Container Service provide a kind of service where clusterized service where you can deploy the application into the cluster. Okay, and that's how it works. So this is one of the most popular tools in Amazon ECS. To streamline Docker container deployment on AWS, there are several best practices tools that can be used, and ECS is one of them, which provide a scalable, highly available container management service that make easy to run and scale Docker container on AWS. Similar like ECS, there is EKS also, which is based on the Kubernetes. But ECS is native AWS services where support all native AWS component like EC2, Elastic Load Balancer, Route 53, Network VPC, etc. etc. So Amazon ECS is fully managed container service which simplify your deployment, management of component and scaling a containerized application. In simple word, Amazon ECS help you to launch, monitor, scale application. You can define the custom scaling capacity rule based on the demand. Exactly that work. Like we don't have to worry about it, right? Everything will be configured under scaling. Just have to put the threshold you are monitoring, up to what threshold your scaling should happen and scale down should happen. Okay. It also has a different component like cluster, services, task definition, and the container agent. So let's understand this one by one. Cluster is kind of encapsulation of the all the services, all the application where you can have a similar kind of ecosystem or infra using it that you can encapsulate into the one cluster. That is how the cluster works. So while you're creating the ECS, right, it will have an option to create your ECS cluster. You can see in our letter demo. Services where which type of application will serve, what will be the purpose of particular application that define the services. The task define the your execution. So what type of, like, whether it's a cron job, whether it's an add cart, whether it's an update card, based on the your functionality, you can distribute your tasks separate like that. And task definition define whenever our tasks are getting added to the ECS service, what should be a predefined infra. like what should be the memory, what should be storage side, what should be the Docker image used, all should be defined in the task definition. And container agent is a duty of the continuously listening the health of the task. Based on the task health, it keeps triggering the alert and triggering the adding the extra task, like draining the task also. All can be managed by the container agent. So it works like an agent middle between the ECS service and the developer. So let's understand the benefit of Docker container deployment on AWS. Like what are those, right? So the first is the speed. Why speed? Because of their lightweight, modular nature, container can enable the speedy iteration of your application. Development speed is improved by the ability to dividing the application into smaller units. You can see always like Docker image while building a Docker image or Docker file, right? You can specify the what are things required. Even if you're adding the multi-stage Docker, you can reduce the size of your Docker, right? And because of the size of your packages, right, your deployment is getting into speed mode. And that is what the speed is one of the benefits of the Docker container deployment. Consistency. Because we are using the Docker container image, which is encapsulated into the multiple things, whichever environment you go, test, stage, production, code, dependent library, everything's going to be same. Like this is one of the pain point which always developer has. Like this was working in a local, like, and this package, but when I deployed to the particular environment, it stopped working or it's showing the error saying this dependency is not there. So what we have to do that time, like we have to always keep that library dependency package into your code repository and keep the similar. But there is no guarantee that package's compatibility or will work on each and every different environment. But that problem is solved by the Docker container deployment, where you do not to worry density. It allows you to efficiently use resources like CPU memory, instances based on the workload. Container can easily restrict it to a certain number of CPU and allocate a specific number of memory. So it like a you can control, right? The density you can control by using the adding the CPU memory and the instances number also based on the workload. So if the workload is low, keep the less count. If workload is high, keep the higher count accordingly to work. Next is the portability. The flexibility of the Docker container is purely based on the portability, as you above said, right? Portable to everywhere. The ease of deployment and smaller size compared to the virtual machine like Git. Docker provides a simple mechanism for a developer to download and install a Docker container and their subsequent application using the command Docker pull. That is why the simplest, right? You just got to go to Docker Hub, click on the right Docker image and just run the Docker pull command. Your Docker container will be available on local machines, right? So along with that, there are various benefits which can't be listed each and everything, right? And that's how the Docker container deployment work very well on the AWS. Docker offers numerous benefits of variety use cases, whether development, testing, deployment, or production. According to recent statistics, 50% of organizations are currently using Docker container, you believe, and 90% are planning to use them in the future. It's clear indication that Docker container are becoming an increasing important from business looking to stay competitive. Now, deploying a Docker container on ECS. How to deploy Docker container on ECS? Like, what are the prerequisites for that? Like, you require to download package for the Docker installation one. It's based on the Mac or Windows, you can download it. And then you should ensure that AWS account is there because you're running on AWS. You need to ensure that the AWS credentials are available there. Now, how to set up the AWS credential? There is a separate page is available. You can go through in like AWS credential setup. Okay. You will land it to the CLI command line interface where you can set up the credentials file setting. This is how exactly the things work. Your AWS credential file will look like this inside your machines, right? When you do cd /.aws file, and you can run the command like AWS configure. It will ask you access key, secret key, default region, and what format. You just have to enter your details, and that configuration can be installed there. So once your AWS configuration is done, right, you can start applications with. There are various type of different APIs are available through the command like auto scaling, cloud formation, authorized security group. But we have to make sure that whatever the AWS credential we are going to use, it should have that right IAM permission. So that requirement is given here in documentation. What are the things like that? You can always go to the give a full access also, but that is not recommended to give a full access. Let's look at that. What are the access level you needed? Only allowed that So limited access is always a good practice to follow in the security. So first steps will be like creating a context. Context means like when you install Docker, you need to tell Docker, okay, what context I'm going to use it. Okay, that's it. So you can run the multiple contexts on the Docker. Like when context is right, like it's a different type of virtual environment, right? So the command will be Docker context create. Now take example, like you're going to create a ECS my ECS content. That will start the content created. It will ask you which AWS credential you have to use it. That you can define the values and accordingly the context will be created. And when you're creating a context, you can always see that command using the Docker context field. This one. So you have to always choose the context while using the Docker ECS using this one integration part. How to run the Docker Compose applications right along after this context as set, because you will always be there inside the Docker Compose file. So as by default, you have to do the compose.yml file or docker hyphen compose.yml file. It will like, and once you've done that, you just run the Docker Compose up. Docker Compose up start integrating this Docker mention file, the compose file into the respective AWS account. Start creating the infrastructure. Okay, that is how it works. Exactly work. And you can always down your or like remove your infrastructure, whatever that is in the Docker Compose down file. Okay, you have to check the Docker Compose log. Your Docker Compose log commands are there. There's a multiple different commands are there. So this is how exactly work. You can log the Docker Compose files also log. So everything is mentioned in Docker ECS integration on AWS. If you have any private Docker image, you can use along with the Docker username and password. Okay, and it can be stored into Docker secret files, and automatically that will be by default taken based on the whenever the prompt for the username password. It's about the simplistic way to use that. You can go through it. It is easy documentation. They use it. Right. So let's move to the slide. How we will learn, right? Okay. We'll see the demo, like how it really works. Now next is the challenge. Okay. Now you have seen the official Docker ECS integrations on with the on AWS, right? So, but there is one challenge. I think while scrolling up, you might have seen something, right? So challenges is like this as well. Docker Compose integration for ECS and ACIs, the Azure one, is retiring in November 2023. This year, right? It's just few months away. Like, so as a determinant of Docker Compose integration for the ECS, that is the Amazon Elastic Container Service, and ACI, that is the Azure Container Instances, approaches in November 2023, and there is arise a concern about finding a suitable alternative to enable the Docker in ECS. So what should we do now? Okay, this is kind of a challenges, right? We just thought like here, okay, follow this documentation and we'll be ready to do start with the ECS integration. But there is a challenge. Now, how to overcome this challenge? What are the solutions are available? Let's look at it. Yes, there is an alternatives we define. Okay, that is a repo called Compose-ECS. So let's look at the Compose-ECS hyphen. This is a open source repository, and yes, and the news is this is going to be handed over to the AWS, and AWS will be the sole owner of the managing this repository officially. And this is the Compose here, right? It has all the options available here, and documentation is given here, like starting with the standard Compose file. You can just go through it, or you can just copy this file as a standard template where you have to install the engine applications, and you can do the engine application using this one. And the compose command, instead of a Docker compose up, here a command will be the compose-ECS up, and you will be showing that, okay, what are the components are getting created, like demo group, log group, Jenkins target group, cloud map, default network, load balancer, cluster, Jenkins execution rules, all this will be listed here, and the status of the particular each component creation will be displayed. And once it comes, you can see that ECS logs, and you can see all the details like how it exactly, like how it Jenkins happen over it accordingly. ECS piece, like compose-ECS PS command show you that, okay, this is the task is running it and take it of the particular running task. And you can have the endpoint also here, where you can hit the endpoint and see that particular application. And when you have to remove your all the infrastructure, you can just mention that Compose-ECS down. Exactly similar like the Docker ECS integration, right? Instead of Docker Compose up, use the Compose-ECS up. Instead of Docker Compose down, use the Compose-ECS down. So nothing like a must change, just the repository has changed. Now let's look at how to do this repository. Let me just go to the another one. So Ajit has mentioned some of the missing steps into the repository. I'll just tell you how to do it. You can just clone the repository. Once you clone the repository, go to the cd compose-ecs, run the make command. It will install the respective installation packages, and once you've done that, cd /bin, and there you can run as the /compose-ecs, and you will be seeing that like this is how it actually works. Okay, but if you don't want to do it every time in the particular respective repository, you can always set up the environment path, and by default the command will be use it whenever you use the compose-ecs. So this is one command to set up the environment path, and we don't have to do every time. We just have to run command like compose-ecs. This is how exactly work, and as I already mentioned about the usage. So let's look at a demo, how exactly work, how exactly looks, how the application also can be faster, as we mentioned in the benefit, right? How exactly the faster Docker deployment on AWS. Let's look at that part. Yeah. So I have already cloned the repository. You can see that repository inside there. Okay, the repository is available here, and it is there. I already installed the command. So let's look at the yes, the things are there where already the compose-ecs is available, and the created a sample compose.yml file. Oh, sorry, mistake, compose.yml file. Yeah, this is a service like Jenkins image /ATS. Yeah, as per the same GitHub repository sample only. So now you will see that AWS configuration is already set up there. I will have to just compose-ECS, then up command, and this will start. So it is started, like create in progress and initiated, and you can always track this process into the your Docker also, right? The AWS also. It will take a few minutes of time to do it. So I'll already log into AWS account. Let's go to the ECS container service. Yeah, you can see this bin cluster is getting used, right? As per our, you can see here, we're going to use it. So by default, the bin is using it. Under the cluster, you can see the service are getting created because they are today a task. You just check out the task definition is ready here. If you open the task definitions and see the details, you will be able to see the data on, okay, what are their like name, images, what will be command, okay, what Docker image we are going to use. You can see docker.io Jenkins LTS and this command. What port we are going to use it, what VPC network we are going to use it, what is the compiler with ECS target or something else, what is CPU size, memory, and everything is there. That is how the task definition works. The task definition defines that, okay, what will be by the configuration template whenever I launching the task. And that's how exactly works. Namespace also getting created here, where it will be like which namespace are to deploy it. Let's keep observing how it takes another few minutes of time. There, what is the status is there? Oh, load balancer getting. You can always track, okay, which particular respective component are getting created. Once it's completed, we'll move to the next one. Load balancer is getting created. You can see, right, how the small line of compose via the mod file create the full infra into AWS. Okay, this is how the power of this repository, the compose-ECS. Right? I will recommend to give a try once and see. Okay, it's completed. So let's check out compose. Yes, log. Yes, you can see all the information about your deployment part, like how it exactly work on everything. So the initial found admission, if you want to find out the right initial in password, you can find out in this file. So let's look at the what is the endpoint here. This will be a load balance endpoint. This hooray! So we just got our Jenkins install just by simplifying the two steps, like setting the AWS configure and setting up the compose-ECS. That's how exactly work, and you can continue this one part. So let's look at the components also inside the cluster. Like you can see that the one task is running here. Go to the cluster, find out the service is getting created here. You can see the services definition here, select which tasks are running to services. You can always look at the task, the health of the task, what is the status of this. If you open the task, you'll be able to see the public IP also, IP also, by putting the support 8080, you should be able to get the Jenkins one, or either you can use the load balancer. Okay, this is how exactly the deployment is work with the Compose-ECS. Like, cool. So let's back to our PPT. So you guys got the alternative options. What are the challenges in existing ECS documentation? Feel free to give a try on that. And if you have any comment, you can drop the comment on the repository. This is open source, so people will be able to help you on that particular things. And one of the important part of the Docker, like Compose-ECS, is like it doesn't require to set the Docker content. Now, if you have seen that in Docker ECS integration file, we have to set the command like Docker context set context command. Okay, which context you have to run it. But here you don't do that. Based on the compose file, it automatically take up the things. The reference is given. Okay, here you can see that with this slash docker slash compose-ECS will be able to land it to the right GitHub repository. This is all about exactly all this session. Thank you very much. And you can connect me with here anytime, or if you have any query also, feel free to join a Collabnix slash here. The URL of the Collabnix slash is collabnix.lab.